Friends, it is good to be here. Do you notice the extra light coming in to this sanctuary here at Newbury and Berkeley Street? I want you to look up if you can. If you can't, when you're next on this side of the sanctuary, the alley side, I want you to look up. You're going to notice something that's missing, something that comes with what is missing. Half of our clear story windows are being restored right now by Serpentino Glass and Company. Therefore, there is just a layer of plexiglass-like substance, bronze-colored. And for the first time in my life, I think probably all of our lives, we can look out of these windows and see the steeple. We can see the sky. We can see the clouds for the first time ever. We're able to see in a different way. And I want to invite that image into the rest of our service this day, wherever we are, to see with new eyes, to receive light in some new ways, to give thanks to God for the restoration that is happening even when we don't even know it's happening. This is an image I give thanks to God for. Also, the experience of singing together. It's been a long minute since we have sung together, and it feels good. So thanks be to God for that. Thanks be to God for all of you as we are all gathered. I'd invite us to pray together. God of all times and all places, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. You may have heard it recently. Let me be clear, I am not talking about the increase in traffic on Greater Boston's streets these days. There is what I would call a buzz in the air. It's floating up from street corners, bus stops, front porches. We used to hear it every time around this time of year, but it's been a minute since these sounds have graced our ears. For last year at this time, silence. Homeschool, Zoom was the rule. But yes, this year, the buzz of back to school in Boston and beyond is back. Conversations, voices, laughter, some tears, instructions lift from the gatherings at bus stop corners. Groups of kiddos congregating, walking, biking, scootering down streets, sometimes with parents, sometimes solo. Open apartment or passing car windows don't allow us to quite decipher the specific words that are coming together, but we hear the overall message, the intonation, the rhythm. There's something deeply right about it, something holy. Day to day pours forth speech. So goes the more familiar way. We know Psalm 19, faith so well read for us this morning as we follow along Eugene Peterson's The Message version. God's glory is on tour in the skies. Godcraft on exhibit across the horizon. Madam Day holds classes every morning. Professor Knight lectures each evening. Their words aren't heard. Their voices aren't recorded, but their silence fills the earth. Unspoken truth is spoken everywhere. Like we could add a verse to Over My Head. I hear music in the air. Unspoken truth is spoken everywhere. And we often imagine these images in connection to the natural world, especially here at Earth-loving COTC. And I, of course, love such an understanding and practice it. Trees and cicadas pour forth speech, truly. But this year, might we imagine, in addition to the natural glory of God emanating from trees, coming from the voices of children trekking off in search of learning. Unspoken truth spoken everywhere, day to day pouring forth speech. But of course, like a frown beneath the ubiquitous face mask, some deeper truth lies hidden beneath the surface this year. COVID anxiety is real, justified, and lurks like an ever-present low-grade fever. Delta is not our favorite Greek letter these days, especially as we keep in mind our beloveds under the age of 12. Walking, biking, scootering, moving. hoping to emerge safely and listening in new ways. What should be a clear story of epidemiology's truth, the way viral particles can travel as aerosols, COVID in this country has become a muddled mythology of conspiracy spin and painfully labeled as freedom of speech. Don't take away my freedom of speech by forcing me to mask. Don't take away my First Amendment constitutional rights by telling me what to do with my body. Even science shows my choices have deadly impacts on my neighbors, regardless. Freedom of speech, when freedom hurts others, is costly. Now, don't tell me what to do with my body, so goes that freedom rhetoric, unless, of course, another person's pregnant body, says the legislature of Texas in a newly enacted egregious anti-choice law called SB 8. Many of the same voices who claim governments and schools have no say over a person's body when it comes to masks and vaccines says it's fine to mandate when Texans can and can't do what they can and can't do when it comes to reproductive rights. There was a supreme silence from the Supreme Court. Such a silence, however, a profound contrast to the silence of truth that day by day pours forth speech. This silence is violence. Freedom of speech, when it hurts others, is the expense of speech. There is a cost to what we say and what we don't say. The tongue is a fire. Did you hear Faith say that? The tongue is a fire. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and itself is set on fire by hell. These are hardcore words. These are untamed words from the Jamesian community, holding little back. The tongue is like an untamed wildfire out west, creating hell-like experiences for those shuddering in climate change. They speak. The tongue speaks and has an impact on people's lives. We all know that words can hurt far more than sticks and stones. Look no further than the words and their impact here in this country and around the world over these past 20 years, especially in the immediate aftermath of those tragic events of 9/11. Hunt down and kill, revenge, collateral damage, war on terror, regime change, weapons of mass destruction. I had to remind myself that in 2003, 70% of Americans thought Iraq's Saddam Hussein had a direct role in 9/11. And just to be clear, he had nothing to do with it. The Costs of War Project estimates 920,000 people have been killed in post-9/11 U.S. involvements and conflicts. The majority of such deaths, civilians. And right now, in no small part because of intentional words that have sown skepticism in some conservative circles against masks and vax, we have about the same amount of people dying each day in an 9/11 quantity because of COVID. Now, this could have been prevented with different words, with less lies, with less double-tongued fear-mongering. The tongue is indeed a fire. The power of speech, the expense of speech. Closer to home. Have you ever said something you regret? Something you wish you could have deleted? Have words from your mouth caused pain for someone else? Have words from someone else caused you pain? Has your silence hurt someone? Has the silence of your friends or colleagues caused you pain? Friends, there's so much for us to say about not saying. Speech and silence and their direct ties to morality and justice. Words and how and when we say them matter. The journey of our church over these past 2 decades has been one swimming in the currents of justice, trying to be educated like those kids at the bus stop about this very truth. Black lives matter, Water is life. Silence is violence. Trans folks are beloved. Stop Asian hate. Stop anti-Semitism. Stop Islamophobia. All are welcome. Climate jubilee. When the tiny rudder of our tongue is used, the entire ship can be moved for God. For the purpose, not of destruction, but of construction, of formation and liberation. We all know the experience of a well-timed word of encouragement for building up. At the beginning of this anxious back-to-school week, our son Rowan's cousins sent him a few placards that they had handmade lovingly that said, "First grade, Rowan, you've got this." We all need to hear that. We've got this. When an ally speaks up courageously against that bully who is bullying the other kid at school, the rudder of the tongue is being used for God. When Jesus and Simone yesterday helped someone who was unable to share their own name here in our sanctuary seeking shelter last night, the rudder was moved for God. When the deacons send incredibly timed cards to those of us in pain, the rudder is used for God. When Wendy, you make phone calls on people's birthdays here in our community, the rudder is used for God. When you labor in translation, Spanish to English, English to Spanish, you, stewards of our connection to Dulce Nombre de Jesus in Nicaragua on a regular basis with those exchanges, sharing openly our community, our challenges, our hopes, in both places, the rudder is moved for God. And the power of silence is not always violence. We remember not saying something can be saying a whole lot in love. The silence of shared remembering, of course, in grieving and in solidarity. I have been struck this past week, and especially yesterday, at how many people were drawn to this 20th anniversary remembering of 9/11, because I feel like we need places to mourn collectively. We need a Pennsylvania, a New York, a ground zero for COVID right now. We need it for Black Lives Matter. We need it for all the injustices of the climate-changing world we live in. And so too rarely we find. We need places to fall silent, to remember God's presence and the solidity we feel in coming together. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. With it we bless God, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. My siblings, this ought not be so. So goes James' epistle. And it's arguing against self-division. As in earlier parts of this letter, the moral exhortation to avoid being double-minded, two-faced, and double-tongued. There must be authenticity in one's yes being yes, one's no being no. There must be a centering on the other who is made in the likeness of God, and there must not be a curse. Get behind me, you Satan. Jesus seems to have missed the moral exhortations being put forth here in James to tame thy tongue. Each time we hear this fire-like intensity from the one of peace, we bristle. For the vitriol always seems a bit over the top here, Jesus, the punishment not in line with the crime. After the first three explanations recorded in Mark's gospel, where Jesus speaks of the need to endure suffering and death, Peter pulls him aside and rebukes him. Jesus, stop this nonsensical prophet. Speak, you can't be rejected and killed. You are the Messiah, the chosen one of God, sent here to help us overthrow the Roman occupation and establish a new community of justice and peace. I think we all find it easy here to sympathize with Peter. Jesus' style here of motivation seems counterproductive. Why the pessimistic, apocalyptic speak? Isn't it more motivating to preach vision and hope over gloom and doom? But Jesus' response is clear and sharp, and strong message is sent. Get behind me, you Satan. The Greek here better being translated as get behind me, you adversary, you divider. You don't get it, Peter, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. You are dividing the identity that God has given to me. You are making me out as double-tongued, as two-faced, as inauthentic. Jesus is condemning Peter's vision for the future. Peter's misunderstanding that's rooted in the assumption that the way of Jesus will be associated with the way of powerful domination, aligned with the ways of the world, a mindset on human things of violent overthrow, even overthrow that seems justified, the messianic toppling of the Romans, success, not suffering. In an emotional response, Jesus decisively denounces such a worldview, and he knows that the way of love is always the way of nonviolence, always the way of mutuality, and often involves pain. Love requires seeing the world for the way it is and going in with solidarity to the places where there is hurting. To be clear, Jesus here is not preaching self-hatred or pain-seeking, as way too much of Christian atonement theology has promoted over the centuries, which I call Christian atonement heresy. Let me be clear, God does not require or desire or cause suffering. Taking up our cross and following is not taking up suffering. For Jesus here is emphatically affirming with the words about who he is while rejecting any worldview that mistakes God's way of love, justice, radical hospitality, and tries to divide it into the ways of competition and violence against others. The way of God's kingdom is the way of radical equity and solidarity, of speaking truth to power, and such words of courage that come from the mouth often clash with a world bent on selfish promotion and consolidation of power. And sometimes that clash feels like a cross. Where there is suffering, there is the promised one. Where there is pain, there is God. I love the liberation lens of this text, that here is Jesus called to take up the cross in very literal context. If you want to follow me, go to the place where the crosses stand. Go to those places where there is suffering at the hands of power, and then in forceful love and courage, speak truth to that power. Take up, rip out those crosses from the ground of empire, and follow after me in the radical ways of love and solidarity. Do as Jesus does. Speak up, dear church, even when there's echoes through the speakers. Speak up. There's an expense to speech. As a result of such courage, movement is born. Others are nourished and liberated. Remember, Jesus, right there in Jerusalem, gathers with his friends around that table as they are nourished right before the realities of the cross. And even more so, we remember beyond the cross, the resurrection. So friends, the question for us that I would pose for us this morning, how might we be called to speak up? In these uncertain days, when facing our own occupations, the unpredictable swirling of viral and imperial forces around, what words might we need to conjure from our lips and tongue? Words of encouragement, words of confrontation, words of liberation. In these divided days, it is easy to begin believing in the myth that everything is divided, even thinking about how we are right now, trying our best to work with technology and be in more than one place at one time. We can lament that at times and think that we're divided and the church will never be the same. Or we can see with a new perspective of looking through something that is in the midst of restoration, like these windows, and see new views and see the church unfolding in brand new ways. Maybe we've never been the church in such broad reach and expansive ways that are accessible in more ways to all than ever before. Perhaps there is a hailing of a new creation at work. I have to end with one of my favorite new television series called Ted Lasso. Has anyone seen this one? There's a lot out there. I recommend this one. It's about a soccer team, and it's one of the few shows that I've seen. There's no guns, there's no violence. There's a lot of mutuality and uplifting, and it's quite funny. There's a scene where two rivals on this soccer team, very male in their understanding, very binary, stand up in very chauvinistic, misogynistic, confrontational ways throughout this series, until one of them is confronted by his father in a very embarrassing way. His father is drunk and comes into the soccer locker room and embarrasses his son in front of all his fellow teammates. And the son eventually responds and stands there, totally bare in front of all of his friends, shamed, broken. And his friend, who is his rival, without any word at all, immediately runs to that friend, that competitor, his fellow teammate, embraces him in front of all the other teammates, and the tears flow freely from his rival. Friends, we can speak without saying a word. Our embrace across difference can be an embrace of courage and love, a taking up of a cross and following in the ways of love, reminding others that they are not alone in their pain, in their suffering. They are not isolated. We understand, we get it, and we're with you. The Psalms are meant for singing. In Psalm 19, that's how God's word vaults across the skies from sunset to sunrise, warming hearts to faith. So how can we keep from singing? Our life flows on an endless song above earth's lamentation. We hear the sweet, though far-off hymns that hail a new creation. Through all the tumult, all the strife, we hear the music ringing. It finds an echo in our soul. How can we keep from singing? Friends, let's join that song this year. Thanks be to God. Amen.